The city of Nairobi was so beautiful and bright. Leila stood at the glass window of her 10th floor apartment, arms folded, eyes fixed on nothing. Behind her, the silence of the room was thick, broken only by the low hum of distant traffic and the ache in her chest that had never quite left. She hadn't spoken to Malik Otieno in 3 years. Not since the night he vanished without a word. No texts, no goodbye, not even a cruel explanation. He had left her with an empty bed, a shattered heart, and questions that clawed at her every night. She had built a new life since then, brick by painful brick. But some scars don't heal with time. They deepen. That evening, as she scrolled through her emails, a name appeared in bold that made her blood freeze. Malik Otieno. It wasn't a message. It was an invitation. His name was on the guest list of the very gala her firm was organizing for a high-profile tech merger. Her fingers trembled. Her eyes burned. The past she buried was walking right back into her life. What could he possibly want now? Leila paced her living room, the invitation still glowing on her laptop screen. She clicked it shut and let out a shaky breath. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pretending she didn't care. But her body remembered him, his laugh, his scent, the way he'd trace lazy circles on her wrist when they sat in silence. She hadn't told anyone the truth about that night. Not even her closest friend, Aching. Malik's disappearance had left a crater in her world, and everyone had assumed he just wasn't ready for commitment. That's what she let them believe. But the truth was darker. That night, just hours before he left, Malik had whispered something strange. If I ever disappear, just know it wasn't by choice. At the time, she'd laughed it off, teasing him for being dramatic. But when he actually vanished the next morning, his phone off, his apartment cleared, social media wiped, it became something she never dared speak aloud. She opened a drawer and pulled out the last photo they'd taken. Her smile in the photo was real. So was the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. But if he loved her, why had he gone? Her phone buzzed. It was Aching. Aching, you coming for the final walkthrough at the venue tomorrow? Leila. Yeah, I'll be there. Aching. Great. Just FYI, your ex is on the list. The Malik guy. Small world, her. Leila didn't reply. Her hands trembled again. Malik was back. And this time, she needed answers. The next morning, Nairobi was its usual chaos. Matatas honking, street vendors shouting, and the air thick with urgency. But Leila barely noticed. Her heels clicked with purpose as she walked into the Panari Hotel ballroom where the tech gala was to take place. Her team bustled around with checklists, cables, and floral centerpieces. Everything had to be flawless. She wore power like a second skin, fitted navy jumpsuit, sleek bun, and a red lip that said she feared nothing. But inside, her chest tightened with every second. Would Malik be here early? Would he pretend nothing happened? Leila. Aching waved from across the room, clipboard in hand. We just need you to approve the lighting rig. Leila nodded, following her. She didn't want to talk. Not yet. Not until she'd seen him. Then it happened. She turned a corner, and there he was. Malik stood in conversation with one of the investors, his profile unmistakable. His beard was fuller now, jaw sharper, and suit tailored to perfection. But the moment he turned and saw her, the world slowed. His eyes met hers, and in that second, everything they'd buried came rushing back. Leila's throat went dry. Her body betrayed her, her heart racing like it remembered what her mind tried so hard to forget. Malik's expression didn't show surprise. It showed regret. And maybe longing. He excused himself and walked toward her. Each step sent a fresh wave of confusion through her veins. Leila, he said, voice low and familiar. She stared at him, frozen. She could scream, slap him, hug him, break down. Instead, she whispered, you have no right to say my name. Malik stopped in front of her, his face unreadable. For a second, it looked like he wanted to reach for her hand, but he didn't. He must have known that would be too much, too soon. I deserve that, he said softly. But, please, can we talk? Leila narrowed her eyes. Talk. You disappeared like a ghost, Malik. No calls. No messages. I thought you were dead. Her voice trembled, the fire in it barely masking the hurt beneath. And now you just show up looking fine? Successful. Like nothing ever happened. Malik glanced around. A few event staff paused as they passed, sensing the tension but pretending not to notice. Not here, he said. After the gala. Please. 1 hour. That's all I ask. Leila stared at him for what felt like an eternity. Her fingers curled around the folder she held like it was a shield. Why should I give you even a second? She asked. He hesitated, eyes lowered. Then he looked up, and in his gaze, there was something different, something fractured. Because I didn't leave you, he said quietly. I was forced to go. And if I don't tell you the truth now, you'll never know what really happened. To me. To your family. Leila's heart dropped. Her family. The words hit her like ice down her spine. He knew something. Something she didn't. Something she hadn't expected. Before she could say anything else, Achin called from across the hall. Leila. We've got an issue with the seating plan. She looked at Malik one last time, then turned and walked away, without another word. But her mind was spinning. What did he mean? What had her family, her father, hidden? Why was Malik involved? And most of all, why did part of her still care? The rest of the day passed in a blur. Leila moved through the motions, smiling at guests, directing her team, nodding at speeches. But inside, she was miles away. Her mind kept rewinding to Malik's words. I was forced to go. And if I don't tell you the truth now, you'll never know what really happened. To me. To your family. It didn't make sense. Her family was the picture of stability, or so she thought. Her father, Emmanuel Mwend, had always been stern but loving. A respected retired civil servant. Her mother was quiet, religious, and never one to raise her voice. They had no enemies. No dark secrets. Or so she believed. But if there was one thing life had taught her, it was this: people wear masks. Even the ones closest to you. By the time the gala ended and the last guests filtered out, Nairobi's nightlights had spilled across the city like scattered stars. The ballroom was nearly empty now, chairs half pushed in, servers clearing wine glasses, and music fading into silence. Leila stood by the exit, coat in hand. She was just about to leave when she heard his voice again. Low, steady, behind her. You stayed. She turned slowly. Malik was there, hands in his pockets, eyes softer than she remembered. I'm only here for the truth, she said. Not for you. He nodded, accepting that. Fair enough. Can we walk? Outside, the Nairobi night was cool, the streets quieter now. They walked in silence for a few minutes until Malik finally spoke. 3 years ago, he began, I was working with a startup that developed digital surveillance tools. One of our first clients was a private security firm, which, as I later found out, was a front for something much darker. Leila frowned. What does that have to do with me? With my family? He looked at her, pain flickering across his face. Because the name that came up again and again was your father's. Leila stopped walking. Her heels scraped against the pavement as she turned sharply to face him. My father, she asked, her voice low and sharp. What are you talking about? Malik looked away momentarily as if steadying himself against the weight of what he was about to say. Back then, he began, I found encrypted files buried deep in the system. Contracts, wire transfers, surveillance footage. I was curious. Too curious. I started digging. And what I found wasn't just illegal. It was horrifying. Blackmail, political manipulation, threats, even deaths made to look like accidents. Leila's mouth felt dry. You think my father was involved in that? I don't think, Leila. I know. She shook her head. That's impossible. My father is not, was never, that man. I didn't believe it either, Malik said. But then someone tried to bribe me to keep quiet. When I refused, they came after me. I was attacked. My flat was trashed. My phone was tapped. I had no choice. I disappeared. I went into hiding. Her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. And you didn't think to tell me any of this. You just vanished. Left me to think you didn't love me. That I wasn't enough to fight for. I left to protect you, he said, his voice breaking. They said if I didn't disappear, you'd be next. They knew about us, Leila. About everything. She turned her face away, blinking fast. A storm was building inside her, the betrayal of a father she had trusted all her life, and the aching love for a man who had once been her world. The lines between right and wrong were blurring fast. You don't have proof, she said quietly. You can't make me hate my father on stories and fear. Malik reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. He held it out to her. This has everything I found. Names, dates, transactions. Even a conversation your father had with one of the operatives, recorded the day before I left. Leila stared at it like it was a snake in his hand. I kept it all this time, he added. Because one day, I knew I'd have to face you again. And when I did, I wanted you to hear the truth from me. Leila took the flash drive slowly like it might burn her fingers. She stared at it in her palm, her mind whirling with everything she had just heard. Her father, a man who had never missed a Sunday church service, who tucked her into bed as a child, who taught her to stand up for what was right, now stood at the center of a web of lies she didn't want to believe. Why now? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Why come back after all this time? Malik looked tired, more than tired. Worn, like a man who had been carrying a weight no one else could see. Because they're back, he said. And this time, they're moving money through your PR firm's clients. You're in the middle of something dangerous, Leila. And they're counting on your loyalty to keep you blind. Her knees almost gave out. She reached for the wall to steady herself. He stepped closer, but she held up her hand to stop him. No, she said, trembling. You don't get to protect me now. You don't get to pretend we're still. Whatever we were. You should have told me. I had a right to know. I know, he said, pain lacing his words. But if you read what's on that drive, you'll see why I couldn't. She slid the flash drive into her coat pocket without another word. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in years, there was no romance there, just questions. Endless, impossible questions. I'll read it, she said coldly. But don't call me. Don't follow me. If I see you again, it will be my choice. Malik nodded. That's fair. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the sidewalk like gunshots in the quiet night. Behind her, Malik didn't move. When she reached her car, she sat in the driver's seat and stared straight ahead. Her heart beat like a drum inside her chest. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. And when she finally turned the key in the ignition, she whispered one thing to herself. Please let this not be true.
Watch out for part 2. The event is about to unfold.
She inserted the flash drive and opened the first file, a folder named Umbra Phase 2. Inside was spreadsheets, voice notes, scanned contracts, with names she recognized, ministers, corporate heads, international partners. It was enough to make her feel sick. But what made her skin go cold was a single audio file labeled Mwende. She clicked play. Her father's voice crackled through the speakers, calm, steady, not the voice of a man caught in fear, but a man giving orders. Ensure he disappears. I don't care where. I don't want any trace back to this family or the ministry. He talks. We all fall.